My full name is William Duncan Taylor, Taylor.
Okay. And you grew up where?
In Redondo Beach, California, 100 miles north of here.
So were you born in California?
I was born in Redondo Beach,
My goodness.
and I lived there until I took off to go to Idaho for college.
Where did you go to college in Idaho?
University of Idaho in Moscow, Moscow, North Idaho.
Okay. And you majored in?
Forestry.
And was that a good major for you?
Well, it was my career after I got out.
Okay.
It was forestry range management.
Ah.
My specialty was grazing animals.
And you came back to Southern California?
Uh,
Or did you get a job there in?
well, I had summer jobs in Idaho and in Wyoming and in Colorado, but those were working for the U.S. Forest Service, doing surveys of grazable lands.
And how did you end up back in Southern California then?
Uh, well, I finally got a permanent appointment to the U.S. Department of Agriculture Soil Conservation Service. And my first job was on a mobile crew in southern Nevada. I worked two winters in southern Nevada. You can't work there in the summer, it gets too hot. But anyway, my headquarters was in Berkeley, California. And after the second winter in southern Nevada, they assigned me to a soil conservation district in San Diego County. And I have lived in San Diego County ever since. Just lucky, I guess, that I got that assignment.
And how did you happen to leave that assignment?
Well, it's a kind of an interesting story. They gave me a second soil conservation district to be the crew leader, called the Pomerado, and that was from Lake Hodges down to Kearney Mesa, included Poway, what is now Poway. It was just a village then. And anyway, I had a new office in Escondido. And there was a real estate man from the San Diego 11th Naval District used to come up. There were lands at Camp Pendleton that were leased out to farmers, and there were grazing permits all over the place. And this man, Sam Kendig, used to come to my office in Escondido and borrow me to come up and advise him because he didn't know anything about, especially grazing. So I'd come over. One time I came over with him, and I said, you mean to tell me there's nobody here on the spot that's running all this? He says, that's right. Well, next time I saw Sam, he says, I told the colonel what you said, and he agreed with you. And he wants to know if we'd help him write a job description for somebody to work here. So I said, sure, and I wrote a very short job description of somebody to operate the agriculture here. And I mailed it to him. The next time I saw Sam, he says, the colonel liked your job description, and he wants to know, would you like to have the job? Well, I said, I presume that I would, but I would have to get a promotion because the Department of Agriculture will refuse to release me unless it's a promotion. And soon I got a call back. The colonel agrees to that. come on over. So I quit my job in Escondido, and I moved to Camp Pendleton. And for a year or so, I drove back and forth from Escondido to Camp Pendleton, which was quite a chore. And then working under the supply department, they authorized me to move my family into a house in Camp Pendleton. It was a made-over warehouse down in Camp Del Mar. There were several of those that had been divided into a couple of different apartments. And I and my family, 2 kids, and my mother and my wife, 5 of us, lived there for exactly a year.
And what year was this?
From between 1950 and 1951.
Okay.
And during that year, I was building my house in Escondido, in Vista.
Mm-hmm.
And exactly 1 year after I moved into Camp Pendleton, I moved to Vista with my family. The house was not finished yet, but we had a final inspection, and electricity was. They wouldn't give me electricity until I had my final inspection. Got my final inspection one day, electricity the next day, and we moved in the next day after that.
Oh my goodness. So,
And
go ahead.
a very interesting sideline. We had moved a lot of our stuff from Escondido up to the garage that I had built ahead of the house and stored it in the garage, overstuffed furniture, that sort of thing, that sat in that garage for a year. And the day we moved in, which was the 1st of July, we took all that stuff out in the garage, put it in the parking area in front of the house, ready to take in. We went to bed, and at midnight we had a cloudburst.
Oh, no.
On the 1st of July.
Oh, no.
And we ran outside, put all that furniture back in the garage. And we were soaking wet. But that's a little interesting anecdote, I think. 1st of July, a
1st
cloudburst.
of July of all things in Southern California.
I wish we could get some of that now. Oh, boy.
So what were the, besides the commute from Escondido to your job here, what other challenges were there to your job?
Well, it was a job that nobody had ever held before. There was no real job description, no rules. I didn't know that much about the Marine Corps. I never had a uniform on in my life, but I had to make my own rules. Mm-hmm. And there were about 6,000 acres of farms, truck farming mostly, in fact, truck farming entirely. And there were between 30,000 and 35,000, that's 1,000 sheep, including lambs. And I had to make sure that they were in the right places, and primarily that they didn't interfere with training, because training was what the base was here for. So
where were these sheep mostly located?
Oh, all over the base, wherever there were. Of course, we didn't put them in the brushy areas. Wherever there were meadows or grasslands, there was a lot of old farmland on the base, you know, that brush was all gone, and there was grass. Sheep don't like grass too much; they like weeds.
And was that a contractor that had the sheep? Or?
No, there were maybe 8 or 10 different. Each one had a grazing permit. We we charged for sheep. We charged 40 cents per head per month. 40 cents per head per month.
Katie, if I jump in now, this would be an
Go ahead.
appropriate time for me to ask about this.
That was a lamb. That was a ewe with or without lambs. The lambs were free.
Mr. Taylor, this is a map of major agricultural and ranching areas that were on the base during the period from the middle 1800s up to 1942. Do you recall any other areas that were used for ranching and agriculture aside from what's depicted here? What we see here is the green areas is all agriculture, and then the orange areas are cattle. So down, this is the Isadora area right here. We're up in, that's the air station.
Well, I would have to study this.
Okay.
I better not. There was more agriculture right in here.
Okay.
I'm
in
pretty
Wire,
sure.
Wire Mountain area?
Yes.
Okay.
And well, the South Mesa
Yeah.
was full. I can't believe how it has changed. It's nothing but family housing now. It was one of the farms for which I was responsible when I came here.
Okay, I'll give you this after the interview, and you can take it
Yeah,
home.
we can start
Look at it.
enlarging it and maybe
Yeah.
having places for him to mark.
Yeah, that would require some study.
Yeah.
When you came here, did you meet Harry Whitman? Did you get to know?
Oh yes, good friend.
What was he doing then?
Well, he was pretty much retired, except he and a partner had the lemon grove at Stewart Mesa, and another piece on south of the Santa Margarita, little patch in there. Altogether, I think it was 100 acres of lemons, and lemons were a pretty valuable crop.
Interesting.
He had been for a while the ranch manager when the base first started,
Right.
and I believe he was appointed as a captain, a military captain. But of course he had a son and a nephew that worked here too, and yes,
Now,
I knew him
understand
well.
When he retired, did he become mayor right away, or was that much later when he became mayor of Oceanside?
I couldn't answer that, I'm
Okay,
afraid.
no problem.
Oh yes, he was retired. I'm quite sure before he.
So you basically took over his title of a job.
Well,
when you
he
came.
was long gone before I came.
I see.
There was nobody. I didn't replace anybody.
And so how did your ranch manager position go from that one-person job to becoming director of natural resources? How did that happen?
Grew a little bit at a time. I was working for the base supply officer at the time, and I finally decided the job was too much for me and I needed an assistant. And they authorized an assistant, and I brought in a man who had worked for me in the Soil Conservation Service. I brought him in to be my assistant. And he was that until he retired of old age, and then he died.
Who was that?
Frank Hoyt.
Frank Hoyt. Okay.
Yes.
I recognize some of these names.
Well, and his wife Helen Hoyt was a school teacher in the first school up on the hill.
Was it the Little Red Schoolhouse, or?
I think she started in the Little Red Schoolhouse,
Okay.
but it was up at the north end of the main area there.
And when you ended up here, how many staff did you end up with?
29. There were 8 civilians and 21 Marines.
Okay. What was the base was mostly farm when you came here, or how was it? how was the base at that time?
Well, there were just 6,000 acres of farms,
Okay.
but there was grazing anywhere we could find forage,
I see.
which wasn't everywhere because they're dense brush in a lot of places, and that's just not usable. So, I would say maybe half of the remaining land was grazing. Of course, we didn't have to fence with sheep. We could put sheep anywhere there was feed, because there was a herder always with them, and almost always several dogs with each herd of sheep. Yeah. And they kept them pretty well under control. The one thing that they all worried about was coyotes. At night, the coyotes would sneak in and grab a lamb, or one or more. So we had a trapper on the base who worked for me, and his job primarily was trapping squirrels, ground squirrels. Ground squirrels were a terrible problem.
We could sure use them now.
when I was first here. They would dig holes and clog up tunnels and under the streets. Really, and that was this guy's job, to trap ground squirrels, and he trapped them by the hundreds. But anyway, I switched him, or didn't switch him. I added a little chore to him, trapping coyotes, and he did that for a while.
Was he very successful, or
quite successful? He had a little rig that he'd bury in the ground that just barely stuck in the ground, and it had he would empty the shell of a rifle shot and fill it with poison. There was a little electric device. When they pulled this thing out of the ground, it would fire the poison right into the critter's mouth.
Oh.
And kill it.
Oh, goodness.
And we did that. That pretty much solved our coyote problem. But the ground squirrels, they may still be here. I don't know.
Now, you say you worked for the base supply officer. Do you remember who that was?
Yes, ma'am.
Who was he?
He was a hero.
Okay.
He was Colonel L.S. Swindler. L.S. standing for Leland Stanford. How he got that name, I don't know. But he was the Shore Corps commander at the invasion of Iwo Jima. And he stood out there on the beach telling the troops what to do and where to go. And rifle fire from both directions. And he lived through that. And, that led to the Mount Suribachi flag raising. But he really was a hero. Hmm. I would like to observe in those days, and from the beginning of the Second World War, the quartermaster general was Pete Hill, W.P.T. Hill, general. And he literally ran the Marine Corps. He was just the quartermaster general. But he was the man who went to Congress and talked them into giving the Marine Corps more money all the time. And they depended on him for their life. And the commanding general here would make a decision, and General Hill would reverse it. The general was always mad at my boss, Colonel Swindler, for doing something without getting his permission. and he would, give him the works. And my boss, Colonel Swindler, would call General Hill in Washington, and General Hill would call the commanding general here and put him in his place.
Oh, dear.
And no kidding, General Hill pretty much ran the Marine Corps in those days.
And who was the general at that time of the base?
Graves B. Erskine.
Oh, okay.
And he resented Colonel Swindler hiring me without consulting him first.
Oh, dear. Were you here when Ace Bowen came to the base?
Oh, yes.
Do you recall what that was like and what happened when he got here?
I found him his first place to live.
Oh.
He was an old, I wouldn't say friend, acquaintance. We both worked for the Soil Conservation Service. He was in Imperial Valley, and I was in Escondido. But I found him his first living quarters here in Vista. And but later on, we
had difference of opinion.
we did not agree with each other.
I see.
And,
Did you work together on the water situation here on the base at all?
Oh, a little bit, I guess, but I can't really remember.
Okay.
But he criticized everything I did.
I guess he was involved with the rodeo grounds here.
Oh, he was. He earned his way through college as a rodeo rider,
Oh, I didn't know that.
and that was in Utah. His wife was a LDS Mormon,
Oh.
but he wasn't. I knew them both.
Virginia, right?
Yeah.
And who were the military directors of natural resources after, I guess Ace took over after you, did he?
No, he was over before me.
Before you.
Yes, and he was a reserve, always a reserve,
Huh.
and he never spent any time overseas. And his 30 years came, and he asked for a extension of his. And the rule was that a reserve could not go beyond 30 years. And they literally fired him. But there was a lot of trouble and disturbance about that time, which I can't go into now.
No problem.
But it had to do with water. He came here to fight the water battle. We had on the Santa Margarita River.
Yes.
There were people all the way up and down dipping into it. And we had a big lawsuit with Fallbrook and some other people. And a decision was finally made. And I had to be one of the witnesses down in the federal court in San Diego. But Ace Bowen was in the middle of all that.
Would you be surprised to hear that is still going on?
Not at all.
That's the longest water lawsuit in California.
I'll bet you don't know when it started.
Way before it was a base.
1917.
Do you have any memory about the rubber tree plant here on the base? It was on in the north part of the base.
Yes.
And it was
Yes.
And it was
Yes.
for World War II.
That's right.
Did it still exist when you got here?
Yes, it did. But it was not needed anymore, and part of it was in the San Mateo Valley, and part of it was on the just south of there on the coastal strip, west of the highway. There was still a patch there,
And
But
did
it was
result?
abandoned at the time.
It didn't produce anything, did it?
Oh, they got rubber from it.
Did they?
Oh, yes.
Was it worth their effort at all, or?
I couldn't say. It was all, the plants were still there, but it was all sort of history when I came along. So,
Do you know who tended it at the time?
no.
No.
Well, I think it had been abandoned,
So.
but it was still there.
Okay. Now, I guess before you came here, were you part of the San Diego County Water Authority, or was that afterwards?
Oh, no, long since afterwards.
Oh, afterwards. Okay, I'll ask you about that afterwards then. You were the commanding general's representative during the construction of the San Onofre nuclear generating station.
Correct.
Could you tell me anything about that event? That sounds like an exciting.
Well,
And what involvement did you have?
it's a funny thing. I had friends and acquaintances that wanted to tour the place. Well, it was still under construction, you know.
See.
And they had a tour guide. Well, I would go into their local office at the place and say, I got a friend here that wants to see the construction. And the guy would say, go ahead, you know where to go. I didn't have to have a tour guide. Well, I was there from the moment it started, you know. And I'm trying to think.
Now, I know they shipped the parts from Camp Del Mar up toward.
Oh, well, the furnaces,
Oh,
or the
okay.
they came from a plant in Kentucky, I believe, big, huge tanks. And they came over to the Mississippi, down the Mississippi, and through the Panama Canal and up here to Long Beach, and they put them on smaller ships, brought them down, put them in Camp Pendleton's little harbor down here, and then they put them on a truck, a trailer. And that truck and trailer had 120 tires on it. These things weighed 500 tons without the lids. The lids were shipped separately. Well, they got them onto these trailers, and I had to map out a course for them. We couldn't put them on the freeway because they would have collapsed the bridges. So I had to avoid the freeway. So we brought them over to Vandergrift Boulevard and took the Stewart Mesa turnoff and went past Stewart Mesa and clear up on the old El Camino Road and finally across to the plant. That was for Unit 1. They found different ways for Units 2 and 3 after I had retired.
Oh.
But yeah, they built those later. I was here for Unit 1.
You were involved in lots of things. So the freeway, was the Interstate 5 in existence at the time?
Yes, it was.
It wasn't 101 anymore.
No, it was Interstate 5.
And so I guess you had something to do with that construction as well.
Oh, yes, indeed I did.
What did you do?
I helped them.
You helped them?
Well,
Did you plan the route and all of that, or?
no, but there were some places that I asked for some changes because they were interfering. And one of the things, they put a bridge across, a Camp Pendleton bridge across at the north end of Stewart Mesa. And I had to tell them how much weight it could support. I think It's only 120,000 pounds, 65 tons were the tanks. These things had to support one of our tanks, which was 65 tons. And I had to tell them that, and they waited till they designed that bridge till they got the word from me. What?
So
And
you were the negotiator then for that.
Oh yes. And then there was a place up towards the north end. This was the second segment. It came in two different segments, you know, two different contractors. From Oceanside up to Las Pulgas was one segment, and then the other half was up the other end. But anyway, in the north half, they filled it too high or something, and they came to me and wanted to know what to do about it, and I said, well, put a slight ramp on the too high end, and it won't even be noticeable. So they did. But let's see. Trying to think.
Mr. Taylor, you mentioned that you had to tell them how much weight the bridge could bear. Did you have to work closely with the base operations? With the
I had to ask the tank commander, yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
And so what would happen if they had two tanks instead of one
Oh.
on there?
I don't know, but anyway, I was on a hilltop down at Aliso Creek. I met the group down there, and the southbound lanes were finished, and there was a amphibious tank landing there, and there were cars stopped to look, and cars behind them were skidding, and I told the boss of this whole thing I was talking to him. We were across the street up on the hill, and I said, you know, it would be nice if we had a little parking area of some kind where people could pull off the road. And the guy says, well, you know, we've been looking for places to put, what do they call those? Rest area. And I wonder if we could put a rest area there. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, why don't you write a letter to the commanding general, and I will see that you get an answer. Well, they sent us a letter proposing a rest area on the west side of the freeway, and the letters like that always came to others, the staff, before it went to the general, because the staff would have to recommend. Well, I got that letter, and I wrote the answer, and eventually sent it to the general, and he signed my letter. And that's how the southbound rest stop. Then they came along with a proposal for the other one, and that was just almost automatic. So there's one on each side. And I will tell you, well, I wrote a little note to the general that it behooves the Marine Corps to be friendly with the public. That's one of the things we really ought to do. He agreed with me, and it'll always be true.
Which general was this? Was this still
Oh,
Graves?
I can't remember.
Oh, okay. I was going to say. Now, you were here when the Little Red Schoolhouse was here, too.
Oh, yes.
Do you know when it started, or were you here when it started?
Yes. But
What started that whole thing?
I really can't remember. The Little Red Schoolhouse was down in the 17 area.
Mm-hmm.
That was before they built the one up on the hill.
I know that there was some controversy about military kids going to the school out in Oceanside.
That's right. And
busing.
San Clemente.
Yeah,
They were picking them up, taking them to San Clemente.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. And you were here for the bison.
I was responsible for the bison.
That was your fault.
Well, shall I tell you that story?
Please do.
Well, I got a call one day from the mammal curator down at the zoo. We were friends. He says, "Hey, Bill, we got a bunch of bison that we don't know what to do with. Is there any way you suppose you could handle a few of them?" I said, "I don't know. I better ask the general. I think we could, but I better ask the general." Well, I went up, told the general what the offer was. He says, this was General Pogemeyer.
Okay.
He says, can we handle it? And I said, yeah, I'm sure we can. He says, well, let's do it. So I called my friend who was the CEO for the state natural resources department. Forgotten now what their name was, but anyway, I told him that we wanted to introduce some exotic animals to the base, but we had to have approval from the state.
To do it.
Yeah.
So that's Fish and Game? Or?
Fish and Game, state Fish and Game. And he says, oh no, bison are just like livestock. They're not wild animals. They're livestock. You can slaughter them and make meat out of them if you want. The state has nothing to do with that. Just like cows. So I called the zoo back and told them, and up came a truckload of 6 cows and a bull. Well, I knew they were coming, and I called the San Diego Union at that time and told them what was going to happen, and I said, I suggest you send a photographer up too. And I asked the general, he says, oh yes, I want to be there too. So we got up on Case Springs, and all ready to unload. And I handed the general a cattle prod, and I said, you want to get up there and chase those critters out? He grabbed it, sure. So the general went up and chased the bison out. And he was kind of proud to do it. And there was an article in the paper, but somehow or other I missed it. I can't find it. It's in my archive somewhere.
Well, maybe I have a copy. I don't know.
Anyway, General Pogemeyer was my idol. He was a wonderful man.
Now, it says what you just said, it was 7 bison.
Well, and that was the first load, and then they brought up another load.
So how many did you bring on?
As far as I know, it was 12 cows and 2 bulls.
Oh, okay.
And as the last estimate was 120, so they've multiplied tenfold.
Yes. And they still hang out at Case Springs, as far as I understand.
Oh, they're all over the place.
Yeah.
We had a terrible time finding them when we were up here last December.
Now, were you involved with General Hoffman when he put out the sign for preserving California's precious resources that's out there on Highway 5?
Yes.
And what was involved with that?
Well,
or how'd that start?
I think Paul Campo was
He was involved.
more involved. As a matter of fact, I think this was after I retired.
I think it was, just slightly after.
Very soon after I retired.
And I think it was Colonel Frank.
How familiar were you with any of the family members, like the O'Neills, the McGees?
I knew Bill O'Neill, Mike O'Neill,
Dick O'Neill?
Dick O'Neill, up in
in Orange County.
Yes.
And how about the McGee's at the Las Flores?
Oh, they were dear friends. I used to go down and shoot the breeze with Louis McGee many times. Oh yeah. And I could tell you a little story about that too. He and Ruth died in the same year.
Oh.
And he had a driver's license, and he owned a land grant up by Hemet somewhere. And he used to drive up there, but his driver's license was limited to certain areas. But anyway, when he died, everybody wanted to destroy that junky old ranch house. And I tried to find out if we could find somebody to lease it to, and I got a letter from the Orange County Boy Scout Council, and they wanted to know could they take it over. Mm-hmm. And I arranged a permit for them to take it over. Their job was, or the reason they wanted it was a place to train Boy Scout leaders, not Boy Scouts, but the leaders.
I see.
Which they did for quite a while. And we leased it to them for, as I remember, the lease would end in 2020. So I've forgotten now how long that would have been, 50 years, I think. But anyway, there were still people that, Marines especially, that wanted to go down there and bulldoze the thing out of there. It was an eyesore. Well, I finally wrote a letter to the National Park Service, who have control of landmarks and so forth.
Yes.
And I described the place to them and a little bit of the history and how it got built, so forth, which I will tell you in a minute. Anyway, I said I recommend that it be listed on the Register of Historic Places, which I think the main ranch house is.
Several parts of it are.
Anyway, I got a letter back, and they up-notched my proposal. It's not going to be on the register. It's going to be a national landmark, which is the top.
That's right.
And I don't know what there was about my letter that changed it, but anyway, and we had a big ceremony when they came up. The guy brought me a big brass plaque, and I didn't know what to do with it because people were always stealing stuff like that, you know. Well, I went out in the back, up in the hills there, and found a great big boulder with a flat front on it, flat face on it. And I got a crane truck up there to pull it out. It must have weighed, 2 or 3 tons. And they hauled it down to they hauled it first to base maintenance. And they drilled some holes in it and put this brass plaque on it. And then we put it down in front of in the courtyard of the ranch house down where it still is today. Well, but it was quite a problem. I just didn't want that plaque to be stolen.
And for good reason.
Yeah. But you know, there are thieves everywhere. There's a rest stop north of Las Pulgas. Forgotten what they call that. But anyway, we had one of those El Camino bells. Ah. I've forgotten now where we got it, but we put it on that rest stop up there. About a week later, it was gone. Somebody stole it. Never found it again. Mm. So it's just amazing how many thieves there are around.
It's true. And you said you were going to tell us about Las Flores, how it got built?
Well, how it got built, this was when Pio Pico lived in the ranch house, and he owned the ranch. He was the last Mexican governor of California, and his brother Andres Pico was a general, and they fought the Battle of San Pascual. Forgot who the
General Kearney.
yeah, and the Mexicans lost that, of course, and this all became United States after that. Oh, by the way, the flats down there below Chapo Flats. What?
Isadora Flats.
Isadora Flats. Isadora was either a daughter or the sister of Pio Pico. But anyway, Pio Pico was a gambler, a real bad gambler, and he gambled everything he had away, and there was a immigrant from Ireland who chose to live in Mexico, and he changed his name from John Forrester to Don Juan Forster. And he came up here, and he salvaged Pio Pico's life for him, and in return he took over the Rancho Santa Margarita. I don't know if that included the ranch up in Orange County or not. But anyway, John Forster became the ranch owner, and he had a son, Marcos, who was about to get married, or did get married, and John Forster built the house as a wedding present at Las Flores for his son, Marcos, who, and they borrowed or used bricks out of the old Asistencia, which was a halfway point for the Crusaders between the San Luis Rey and the next mission up.
San Juan Capistrano.
Yeah. I called it the Asistencia. I may be pronouncing it wrong, but anyway, it was a ruins.
Yes.
There were a lot of adobe blocks still there, and that's what they used to build the Las Flores Ranch House. So, anyway, Marcus Forster did get married and lived there a while, and he had all kinds of guests. Ships stopped just west of there. There was the waters were kind of quiet in there, and visitors came to the Las Flores Ranch, and they were hosts. That was their business. But anyway, somebody murdered Marcus Forster in that house, and that was the end of that. But there are still Forster relatives up in
Orange County.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of them was a judge.
So you knew some of these people, though, the descendants of
Well, vaguely.
Tony Forster, probably, and
Yeah.
and his brother.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was talking when they had a historic society had a meeting out there, you know, and I was talking about how the house got to be built, and I was saying John Forster stole the bricks from the Asistencia, and there was a young Forster there. He says, he did not steal them, he owned them. But very interesting anyway.
Yeah. You were here during the 1950s when the Korean War broke out.
Mm-hmm.
How did that affect your work here and life here on the Pendleton base?
Very little. I hardly noticed that. I think the Vietnam War was had more influence.
How is that?
Well, for one thing, after that was over, an awful lot of the Vietnamese people came to this country, to get away from that mess. And we established a camp up in the Christianitas Valley for them. And I chose that spot for that camp.
So you were involved with the refugee tent camps then?
Oh yes, oh yes. And
I understand it took you 24 hours to set up everything.
something like that. But
And that lasted about, what, a year?
I can't remember how long it lasted, but
A lot of people.
It was intriguing, believe me. I saw those young couples walking hand in hand up and down in the camp, and incidentally, we got the water. There was a spring up there in the Christianitas, and I don't know whether you ever heard this before, but where it got its name, Christianitas, the Padres that were going back and forth here. The first Christian baptism in California was held at that spring, and there were signs and there were a little parking area and whatnot. May still be there.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Constantly
But,
needing repair.
Oh yes.
Were you there when they put the plaque there?
I think that was before me.
There was a state historic plaque put there.
Yeah.
And
Yes, that was before
the way
me.
it shows in the photograph is it's like chest high.
Yeah.
Now it's at the foot.
But we made a movie there too.
Did you?
The Gallant Hours, starring Jimmy Cagney, I believe. He was Admiral Halsey in the Second World War, and he had to wear big high lifts under his shoes because he wasn't tall enough for the role. But anyway, he was living in a tent there. We had a tent right by the Christian Spring.
Real close to there, huh?
Yeah. And I had to find them shacks. And I had a bunch of shacks on old farmland that were needed to be removed. And I took these guys around, showed them the shacks, and said, "You can have every bit of it." And they brought them up and rebuilt them. And of course, they were all listed, shown as temporary buildings, Mm-hmm. And they brought a plane in there, a big plane. I think it was a bomber. And they took it apart and rebuilt it in there. And as I remember, when the whole picture was all made, they flew it out of there. They brought it in parts, but they flew it out. But anyway, it was an interesting thing. And when they'd bring lunch in every day, and I was often with them. They had a caterer that brought lunch in. It was quite a good-sized crew there. And the Admiral's aide was a young fellow named of Dennis Weaver.
Oh, my goodness.
And I knew Dennis's brother intimately, who lived in Vista until he died. Howard Weaver. And he called his brother. He wasn't Dennis, he was Bill. Dennis was his middle name.
Well, that sounds exciting.
Yes.
Down in 26 area, there's warehouses there, or there's one warehouse there now
Mm-hmm.
that's we're using as the mechanized museum. I don't know if you've seen it, but it was a building apparently that troops went through. They got their dog tags there. They went through and got put on the trains that went down to San Diego. Are you familiar with any of that?
No,
Okay.
but I think I told you we lived in one of those
You said you were in Del Mar, but this is over in
20.
26 area, at the bottom of Rattlesnake Canyon.
Yeah. Oh, that's 26. No, I'm not
Okay,
familiar.
no
That
problem.
used to be where all the heavy equipment
And
was.
there's still heavy equipment down there too,
Yeah,
as well. Yeah. There was a tree after in 1968. I guess there was a tree. There was a controversy about it at the end of the air station runway, and it was cut down because it had something to do with the Battle of San Pasqual.
I don't remember that.
I think maybe we have it. As I recall, maybe it was there up until the 93 flood. That's my understanding. But anyway. We've had encroachment problems on the base,
Oh, yes.
as you probably did as well, including attempts to build, I think, a trash dump. Is that right? Do you know anything about that? And offshore oil drilling.
No, I don't recall anything.
What kinds of encroachment did you deal with?
We had one. There was a Mexican fellow that organized a union of farm workers. I can't think of the name of that union now, but he came to the base. We had a lot of we had green card guys. They'd come to Tijuana, and our fellows would our farmers would send a truck down and bring a bunch of them up here, and they'd stay for the harvesting season or when they needed a lot of handwork, you know, and then they'd take them back. Well, this guy tried to come on the base and organize our farmers, our laborers. They were just temporary, you know, and the MPs came down here and kicked him out, told him not to come back.
Oh.
Well, they were not stable, you know. They were only here for a short time. So,
No other kinds of encroachment that bothered your work a day?
I don't recall anything.
Okay,
You'll probably come to me later.
that's all right too. I understand that there was something about planting beavers. Do you know anything about that?
There were beavers planted on the base. I hope they're still here. But I was involved with beaver planting outside the base before I came here. Several different occasions I planted beavers. They flew them down here from Sacramento, from the Sacramento River
Yeah,
down here, and we'd unload them.
and the reason for it?
Well, there were lots of willows and aspen trees growing around some areas, and it just seemed like a good place, and some of them are still there.
Now, was it for the base's benefit, or
Oh no,
it's just a good location for it?
yeah. No, I never had anything to do with planting them here on the base,
Oh, okay.
but I know we did have them in Las Pulgas Creek, in that area.
Were you involved with adding fish to the Lake O'Neill or any of that?
Well, yes, to some extent. But
I mean, I saw some stuff that looked like it was great fishing at one time.
but we had some fish we didn't want in Lake O'Neill. I can't remember the name of them, but we dredged Lake O'Neill, you know, because it was full of vegetation.
Mm.
In fact, it was getting loaded where there wasn't room for any more water.
Oh,
So we had a big dredging operation there, and during that we recovered a lot of those fish. They were orange-colored critters, and I can't remember the name of them. But anyway, I think we got them all and chased them upstream, carried them upstream. But
okay.
they probably found their way back down there.
Bill, do you remember when the lake was dredged?
Well, I remember the incident, but I don't remember when it was. I think that was in your department, though.
Yeah, before my time, but yeah, I'm trying to pin that down.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think Paul Campo was the guy that organized that.
We had a place called Windmill Canyon, and I guess we had a heck of a lot of windmills on the base once upon a time. Now the only windmill that I know of is in front of, it's not connected, it's in front of the property at Las Flores. I'm wondering if you remember any of the other windmills, or...
I remember one in the San Mateo Valley, pretty far upstream. And I remember climbing to the top of that. And when I got up there, I was scared to death. I climbed up there because the tailpiece that swung that around to face the wind had come apart or something, and I climbed up there to fix it. That's the only windmill offhand that I can remember right now.
Okay.
What about the one down in Isadora, the Isadora Basin? Do you remember the one down in Isadora Basin? Did that
No.
was that constructed after?
No.
I don't know what you're referring to.
It's there. I flew over it a bunch of times.
Okay, you'll have to show it to me.
It may have been built after. I don't know.
Also, the golf course, as I understand it, and I don't know if that was during your time or not, but there was originally the golf course was supposed to be over there near Deleuze Housing. There was an adobe, well, actually
Yeah.
it was a rammed earth building.
Yeah.
Were you here when that building was built? You remember it was a rammed earth and, gee.
Yeah.
anyway.
I, in fact, met one of my bosses lived in that house.
Which boss was that?
Well, the one who replaced Colonel Swindler.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
And it had palm trees, I think, leading up to it and everything. It was a nice little house.
well, and we attended an outdoor wedding ceremony at that house in the backyard.
Now, did it at that time have a Quonset attached to it for the kitchen?
I can't remember.
You don't remember that?
No.
Okay. Well, it was, that building was supposed to become the golf course for the base,
Yeah.
and you're aware of that.
Yes.
And were you involved with moving all the water line from there to where it ended up at the golf course, the
Oh
Memorial
yes.
Golf Course?
Oh yes.
So what did that entail? I don't know how you did
Well,
it. How do
we
you-
we used reclaimed sewage water, which we still do probably, to irrigate the golf course. And I located the pipelines. That sewage originally was going down into the San Luis Rey River, past several private owners. And there was one owner down there who just loved to file lawsuits, and he was about to sue the base because we were putting sewage on his property.
Is that Mr. Sutro?
Mr. Sutro, Adolf Sutro. He owned a string of bathhouses up in San Francisco.
Oh my goodness.
He moved down here with his mother,
Sutro Bank?
built a house. But anyway, and he became pretty good friend of mine. But we took that sewage and ran it down through the valley where the golf course is. Incidentally, I helped establish that golf course. But anyway, we halfway reclaimed the sewage water, and that's what irrigates the golf course. And then I had to find a way to get it out to Chapo or Isadora Flats, and we took it and poured it into the Santa Margarita River, but downstream from anywhere where we were
Using it.
pumping up fresh water.
Sure.
There was a well down there that irrigated Stewart Mesa, but this reclaimed water we were emptying into the river downstream from that.
Now, the house that we were talking about that Mr. Swindler had lived in,
Mhm.
do you recall anything else about that building at all? Because it's up on a hill, like I said, in Duluth.
There is only one thing I can remember, and it has nothing to do with the house. But we were trapping baby skunks at the time. We had a lot of skunks on the base. We were trapping skunks, and we were taking them into a veterinarian in Oceanside and getting them
Deskunked.
deskunked and giving them. They make great pets.
Oh, do they?
Well, anyway, the colonel who lived in that house wanted a skunk, and I gave it to him. And you know, you'd go to his house and that skunk would be riding around on his shoulder. He just loved that skunk. They make real good pets. Matter of fact, we had one ourselves when we lived down there in the Del Mar area.
Did you?
And I somehow advertised it somewhere, and a lady came clear down here from, somewhere up north, San Bernardino, I think, with her daughter. And I gave it to them. I offered it in my advertisement, and she was real happy to get it. But it's amazing what great pets they make.
Huh.
But you better have them deodorized first.
I think so. Any erosion stories you have for us?
Well, when I came here, all of the usable farmland had the farmers. A lot of the land was leased out to farmers. The base didn't do any farming; it was just leases, you know. And they came in here and plowed up the land in the fall and let the rains hit it, and everywhere you looked, this farmland had gullies in it. Sometimes little tiny gullies, sometimes pretty big gullies. Well, I talked the base maintenance into buying a deep, I've forgotten now what you call it, but it was a spike that went down into the ground about that deep. Took a heavy tractor to pull it, and we made level tracks with that thing around us. Of course, we filled in the bad gullies, but I can't remember the name of this implement now.
There was a Merton brush crusher or something like that.
Oh, we had that.
Might have been that.
We had that too. I bought that too.
So there was a ripper that you're talking about that was
Yeah.
the back of a dozer.
Yeah. But it went, at least 3 feet deep. And it was a thing that we used in the Soil Conservation Service. But it would cure a gully. It cure any kind of erosion, because the water would get down in these cracks, and they were level, so the water didn't go anywhere. And anyway, there
That
was
was a way of channeling the water.
there was an awful lot of that we did all along the east side of the base up here between here and Fallbrook. And right over the fence, the eastern fence over here, the south end of the base, there was a landowner over there that we were trying to protect. His name was Duke Snyder, a baseball
Yes,
celebrity.
especially in Fallbrook, yeah. Did you
So-
deal with many floods on the base?
No,
Any significant ones?
no, we had one or two, but
I think one kind of broke up Highway 5, didn't it?
well, you know, the bridge that goes across the Santa Margarita River just east of the ranch house, that wasn't there when I came here, and the engineers would put a temporary bridge, one that was used in combat, you know, put that over the river. But when the river got too high, they'd have to take that thing out, and nobody'd go up that way. But eventually, they built a permanent bridge across that river. So
Now you see we've raised it, don't you?
I hadn't noticed. I
It's a
haven't been.
raised bridge and it has stoplights on it so that
Oh.
in case the aircraft is going across when you're
Oh,
going
yeah.
across.
Well, you know, all of those little balloons on the above the high voltage
Lines, yeah.
lines.
You stuck those?
I had to instruct San Diego Gas and Electric on all of that, and that was quite an intricate little thing.
I'll bet.
Putting those things up was no picnic.
What about Isadora Flats? Do you know anything about Isadora Flats I should know?
I remember we had a farm crop there once, and I can't remember what it was, either lettuce or cabbage. But anyway, it was a failure, and I sent a herd of sheep up there to eat it, and I found out that there were no essential elements in that stuff that would help the sheep gain any weight or anything. It was just a waste. They liked to eat it, but it didn't do them any good.
Was there anything left of the building that was on that little mound where the cross is? Was there anything there when you got here?
I don't recall anything.
Okay. All right. Larry Carlson has some questions, I think. Do you have some questions?
Well, right along with the erosion question that she asked you earlier, I remember, and I don't know whether it was you or George or maybe both, we were talking about when we had cattle on the ranch, and the cattle loved to just walk in the same path, and they created some erosion along the slopes of the hills, and they almost looked like contours. and we've had erosion in the past. We've had erosion from that because it gets hard, and then the water gets on it, and then it washes out and becomes problems. And you were talking when you got here, you had 30 to 35,000 sheep. How many cattle were here at the time? 'Cause it was a cattle ranch for
Well,
100 years. before.
Toots Whalen, who ran a dairy just south of the base, just bordering the
I
base.
remember Helen, but you remember Toots. Wow.
Yeah. Anyway, we allowed her. She had contributed to the chapel at the main ranch house. She had contributed to making a chapel out of that.
Oh. And what was their last name?
Whalen,
Oh,
Ellen Douglas Whalen,
Yeah, and then Wayne-
known as Toots.
Yeah, just outside there, just south of the sewer plant there at Oceanside.
Anyway, I think it was Colonel Swindler, my first colonel, who said, "Oh, she's been awful good to us. We better." So we made her a permit where I think she was allowed to graze 150, and these were dairy cattle,
Yeah.
but they were not in their milking stage. Anyway, it was all on the south end of the base.
Now, that transformation into a chapel didn't happen while you were here.
No, it was before I came. Yeah.
Did you know about? I mean, like, was it in the papers and stuff? When did you know about it happening?
I think there was a plaque somewhere that talks about it. I don't know.
I don't have anything mentioning.
But anyway,
Alan
there was
Grant.
a movie actor that was primarily responsible for it. Tony Quinn.
Anthony Quinn.
Anthony Quinn. Yeah, he was the main contributor.
Interesting.
Earlier, you also
It had been a
Blacksmith shop, right?
yeah.
earlier you talked about Ace Bowen, and you found him a house, or helped him find a house.
When he first came here, yeah.
Do you remember the year that he came? Because you were here in '48, right?
Yeah, and I think it was shortly after.
Shortly after that, so
Yeah.
in the late '40s anyway.
Yeah.
And you actually worked with him, or at least you were doing. Well, he was an engineer, an ag engineer,
Yeah.
irrigation type engineer.
Geologist, I think.
Yeah. And he from Imperial, and I remember the Imperial Valley part of it.
Yeah.
But that's good, because I'm trying to figure out if he got here in '46, because there were some issues about water then. They didn't know what was going on.
Well, all I know is that he hated my guts. He never stopped trying to slap me down.
Oh dear.
What was his relationship to Paul? Is he Paul?
Well,
I guess he was hired by Paul, and
no, vice versa.
vice versa.
But Paul had been a Marine
Right.
for a while. And he was a geologist, and so was Ace. I don't know how they got together, but they were bosom buddies.
Okay, they were good friends.
Yeah.
I know it wasn't probably your job, but at the ranch house, there were workmen who had been World War II, I guess, Marines. And somehow, when they were transforming the ranch house from an officers' club into a GOQ, they were told to make changes to the house. So one of the changes, there's a painting on a wall inside near what they call the cowboy room, a big painting by Vickers, who was a Marine. And they were told to cover it, and they covered it with target paper and plaster. During your time here, sometime, I don't know when, they talked the lady of the house into letting them take the plaster and the target paper off, and so we can enjoy the painting now. But I don't know very much about that. Do you know anything about that happening?
I don't know anything about it.
Okay, one of these days I'm going to have to show you the painting. I was just hoping.
That's in the ranch house.
In the ranch house.
No, not
You know where the
not the
bar
cowboy
is?
quarters.
You know where the bar is?
Uh,
You must have had a drink in that bar
I
one time or another.
did know where the bar is. Well, we drank. The drink I had was out in the patio.
Well, yeah, in that bar area, there's another little room where they have the painting. So I thought maybe you might know about it.
I have a framed picture of my wife and I having drinks in the patio with Melvin Laird, who was the Secretary of Defense at the time. He came out to give us our conservation award. And of course, later on, we had dinner in the ranch house.
Well, I need to copy your photograph and return it to you, if I might.
Well, I will copy it myself and send you one if you want.
I'd like to scan it so we get a good, clear image of it.
Oh, I've got a
You got to
I've got a printer that'll print it.
Do that great job?
Yeah.
Okay, I'd love to have it. That'd be great.
I'll send it to you,
Okay.
or bring it.
Okay,
Last time I gave you something, I brought it.
that's right. Well, we'll have to show you the dining room painting at that
And
time.
the lady who drove me over here was the niece-in-law of General Pogemeyer,
Oh,
Mary Pogemeyer, who is about to retire from the Vista Irrigation District.
oh my goodness.
And her husband, Rick, just retired from the county job. Can't remember exactly. Can't remember the words.
Do you recall the surfing activities at the Trestles Beach and the Marine Corps and the
Oh, I had to fight for them.
What did you do?
Well, the base wanted to kick them out of there. There's a surfing club, you know, that occupies that, and just because they were civilians, what in the heck are they doing here anyway? And but I managed to get them. I gave them some kind of a permit to keep running there, and as far as I know, they still are.
for a while, the Marine Corps shut them out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you were involved in
Yeah.
getting them access.
Well, you know, they're pretty safe there now because that's a state beach. Well, there's a long story connected with that, you know.
What's the story?
Well, we were not having any Marine Corps activity from San Clemente south to past the power plant, quite a bit south of the power plant, and President Nixon tried to give that land to the state of California for a state park or a state beach. And the Congress got a hold of it, and they used a constitutional
Measure of some
measure that donating or selling United States property is done by Congress and nobody else. And they just dismissed his gift, and we started all over. And we had a big meeting at there's right at the north end of the base. There's something there. I forgot what they call it now.
the beach house there.
Well, it's just south of San
It was the
Clemente.
Coast Guard station, but now it's
Yeah.
San Mateo Point Housing.
Yeah. Anyway, we had a meeting there to discuss that. Oh my goodness, there must have been 20, 30 people there. And all of a sudden the door opens and in walks Richard Nixon. And the first guy he ran into was me. And I stuck my hand out and I said, "I'm Bill Taylor and I work here on the base." "Glad to know you, Bill." Well, I was at the head of the table, and he and his that crummy aide he had, who was
Haldeman or Ehrlichman? Or?
I don't know, but he was a dirty rat. Anyway, the meeting decided that they could lease the land to the state, and I had the job of mapping it after we got all through, and that included the San Mateo Valley, which was leased for farming at the time, and a piece of the hills north of San Mateo Valley, but mostly down south of the power plant. Oh, a couple of miles south of it, I guess.
Now, next door to that Coast Guard station was what they called the Nixon White House. Did you ever get to go in there?
No,
Okay.
but Mr. Nixon had a ladder. He climbed over the fence to get into that Coast Guard station. Yeah, he lived right.
Yeah,
it was
right
right
there,
on the boundary.
Right there.
Yes, I was in that house once,
Were you?
but I don't think I saw Mr. Nixon.
What was it like?
Oh, just a house.
Okay.
Oh yeah, nothing fancy. But every time I turned around, I ran into his guards. You know, he didn't go anywhere without several
Secret Service.
Secret Service guards
Sure.
saving him. Yeah. And when they built the freeway, the old highway, they had a bridge across San Mateo Creek, and they asked me should they destroy that bridge or leave it there. Well, I asked a few questions around, and I found out that Mr. Nixon wanted that bridge when he wanted to get in and out of his place. He didn't want to come out directly onto the freeway because he considered that kind of hazardous. So I told the highway people to leave the bridge there. And as far as I know, it's still there. Oh, the old Highway 101 bridge.
Right. Mr. Carlson, did you have some
Yeah,
other
there's
questions?
a 20-inch pipeline connected to it, so you don't want to take that out. That's very important.
Yeah.
Did you have some other questions?
Well, I don't know. Let's see.
While
I
he's
did
looking,
Go
I'm
ahead.
wondering about fire in the early days when you were here and all the training activities and everything. How was your fire regime and management? How'd you respond to all the fires, to training? and stuff?
Well, I talked the fire department into pre-suppression, and we would go out, and it was a training thing too, for training for the crew, the firefighter crew. We would pick out a piece of brush and burn it deliberately, and but we would always make a little fire break. Like you had a big 6-mile long patch, we'd go up 1 mile, make a little fire break in it, and burn it back this way. Start the fire where we made the break and burn away from the rest of it. And well, that patch would be a fire break for several years after that. And each year we'd go up and grab a little more until we got the whole thing. But it's a cycle thing. And we had a whole lot fewer big fires after that. I've tried to get the county of San Diego to do the same thing. You know, San Diego County does not have a fire department, and it's either state or local. And we've had some terrible, tragic fires, and they could avoid all that if they wanted to by pre-suppression, burning a little bit every year.
And they weren't doing that before you got here on the base?
No. I eliminated all the fire breaks. Camp Pendleton had fire breaks, and they'd go straight up the side of a mountain. And they weren't terribly wide, and a fire with an east wind, fire would just jump over that like it wasn't there. And but that wasn't the worst part. They'd clean those with bulldozers every year, and they weren't fire breaks anymore. They were gullies, great big gullies. And I talked them out of that. There aren't any fire breaks anymore, so far as I know. Are there, Dave?
There are quite a few. I don't know when they came back.
Well, they actually put water bars on them now
Yeah.
to control the
Yeah.
erosion. So
But
There They are trying to do.
But
fuel breaks.
we've got another kind of a thing now called fuel breaks, where they destroy all the brush, leave the grass there, but destroy the brush. A grass fire, a firefighter can go into it with no hazard. A brush fire, you don't dare get into that.
Yeah.
And we started making the fuel breaks, which in a lot of cases meant digging the brush out by hand, just leaving the other vegetation.
Now, when you were here, when you first got here, they still had Marines as firemen on the base, right? You don't remember?
I can't remember.
Okay, because I was wondering when
think
they
so.
started having more civilian employees. I mean, it's almost all civilian now. Okay.
Yeah. I was surprised to learn how many civilians are here now.
Lots.
They didn't have that many fire stations across the base initially, so I'm wondering, you
How
must
many
have
fire
had a lot of ignitions and a lot of training.
Yeah, how many fire stations were there back then?
I wouldn't
Don't
know.
know. Do you have any record on that? Okay. Now, you said you had some observations you wanted to give us.
Well, I have some kind of interesting history. When I was in the Soil Conservation Service, my job was to make farm plans to teach farmers and ranchers the principle of sustained yield. The country in those days had just realized that farmers and ranchers just grabbed everything they could get out of a piece of land, and when it expired, they'd move on and find another piece of land. The old Homestead Act started that, and but in the 1920s, the government started to realize that there wasn't any more free land to give them. We're going to have to figure out a way to keep the land alive. And that was the nature of the Soil Conservation Service. And what our job was to make farm plans, to tell the farmers how to do it. Most farmers didn't know how to do it. And there were all kinds of procedures. Anyway, I made a farm plan on Rancho Bernardo after I got down in this area. Rancho Bernardo was owned by a man, a big engineering contractor. He built the freeway from San Diego out to El Centro, and a big piece of I-15. But Rancho Bernardo belonged to him, as did Rancho Hamul. Rancho Bernardo was 5,500 acres. Hamul was 14,000 acres. He owned them both. Anyway, I made a farm plan on Rancho Bernardo and took it down to his office in San Diego, and it was several pages long, and he says, "Read it to me." Well, I found out, I got all through reading it, and he signed it. And of course, my board of directors had to sign it. It was an agreement sort of thing. I found out later he couldn't read. I had to read it for him. But anyway, then, I don't know when it was, but I would guess maybe in the 1960s somewhere, the Sherman Antitrust, wait a minute, the Wherry Housing Act, Senator Wherry proposed the Housing Act, the Wherry Housing, where the base would grant a contractor a piece of ground. The contractor would build family housing on it. I'm talking about on the base. And the Marine Corps would guarantee them 97% occupancy. after the houses were built, and the Marine Corps had the right to adjust the rental fee. Anyway, it was a pretty good plan, I guess. Well, a couple of partner developers from Texas came out here, and they were the high bidders, or the low bidders, I've forgotten which. Summers and Hahn. Harry Summers and Ernie Hahn. And they built the Wherry housing. And they took a piece of the farmland down on the South Mesa, which at that time was all a whole great big huge farm. And anyway, a little later on, they decided to build the housing up here on the top of the Pulgus Road, where the new school is,
Okay.
where the
Christian
present
Hills.
school is. And they handed them the contract. They didn't ask them to bid. They just handed them the contract, and they built that too. Well, that was the beginning of all this housing development, which amazes me every time I see it down there now. I remember it as all farmland. Well, anyway, Summers and Hahn decided they liked California, and they went down to San Diego, and they rebuilt the U.S. Grant Hotel in San Diego, and then they built the Horton Plaza, which is the largest shopping area in Southern California. It is absolutely huge. They built that. And they came up here and built the North County Shopping Center, just at the south, between Escondido and the lake. Mm-hmm. And then they destroyed my farm plan on Rancho Bernardo, and they built Rancho Bernardo City. And they just threw my farm plan out. You wouldn't believe that had been a farm at one time.
Was any of this around the time of Homosia housing on the base?
No, I
No,
don't think
okay.
so.
Okay.
But anyway, no, I can't believe all the housing that's down there in the South Mesa now.
Mr. Taylor,
Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Taylor, National Environmental Policy Protection Act was passed or enacted in 1970, and that's become a big part of our lives. And that was right in the tail end of your time there. I'm wondering how that impacted your job, or how did you address implementing that law in Camp Pendleton?
I don't recall it, but I think some of the work I had already done at Camp Pendleton influenced that law.
Yeah. I think it was signed into law in 1970, but I think the regulations, it took a while for them to write it. I want to say it was 76 or 7, so it may have been that it just wasn't implemented before you retired.
Yeah.
Huh.
But I think maybe we were one step ahead of them.
Right.
We were already doing it.
Yeah.
And you're doing a great job now. I was all over the base last December, you know.
Yeah.
And I couldn't see a thing I could criticize.
Well, that's good to hear.
I was very proud of you, or whoever's doing it.
Is there something that we've talked about, or something I haven't talked about that I should have talked about with you? Is there part of your story that we're missing?
Can't really think of anything. Of course, I'm not sure I remember everything we talked about.
Well, there must be
Taylor,
something I've left out.
On the way into lunch today, you were mentioning that there were Japanese spies in that.
Oh well,
That was before
that's
your time, but you were
that's a
there.
story that I heard.
Yeah.
the South Mesa down there, which is all housing now, was a farm, and it was operated by some Japanese people. In fact, a lot of our farms at that time were.
Yes.
You know, President Roosevelt passed a ruling that they all had to go to internment camps. And anyway, there were Japanese farmers on the South Mesa there, had been for a long time. And the, I don't know, maybe it was the FBI, somebody, some law enforcement people found out they had everybody knew they had a big high antenna on their farm. Well, they were spying on the U.S. and sending long-wave messages to Japan. And somebody caught up with them. And of course, the Japanese wound up in these internment camps. We had a Japanese family on the base here. And he was a farmer, and he was a lessee, one of my tenants, and he had served in the Second World War, served the United States, and his wife had been in one of these internment camps. And that wasn't exactly fair, I don't think. But
Now there's a postcard showing the front of the base covered with poinsettias. And I know that's Paul Ecky's farm, I guess, at some point. That's what it said on the back of the postcard anyway. Do you know anything about that? Was that anything left of that when you got here?
the postcard, no.
No, I mean the poinsettias.
No. Oh, yes, of course.
Where were they
He
located?
had 200 acres of poinsettias up on the San Onofre Hill. And he had a house up there. And his manager, farm manager, lived in that house with his family. And Paul Ecky himself had moved to Encinitas. His father, or his grandfather, I don't know which, brought the poinsettias up here from Mexico. And up between Hollywood and Santa Monica, there's a little town up there. I remember it way, way back, full of poinsettias. That's where he started his farming. Then he came down here. I think it was Paul who started here.
And was he one of your lessees?
Oh, yes.
So
oh,
he
yes.
had 200 acres.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
All
The family couldn't tell me.
Anyway, they had a fire in their fireplace. The farmer. One night they had a fire in the fireplace, and I think they were going to bed or something, and they had a can of water there, and they wanted to put out their fire. Well, that can of water happened to be gasoline that they used to start the fire, and the house burned down just
no.
completely, and they had to move off. But anyway, along came our housing development, and they wanted to build houses up there, and they canceled that lease. It's all houses now. And the kids that lived there went to school in San Clemente, by the way. Anyway, Paul moved everything to Encinitas, and he was a pretty good friend of mine. He'd call me up just before Christmas every year and ask me to come down there. I think the last time he asked me, he says, "Bring a good-sized truck." I borrowed a 10.5 truck from the base motor pool and went he filled it with potted poinsettias, gifts for. This was just a couple of days before Christmas, and it was stuff that he couldn't sell. It's too late to sell. And of course, he always gave me some great big high ones with big pots for the generals and for the officers' wives club and various people. But I had to pass them around everywhere. It was one of my jobs. And but this happened every Christmas. I don't know how many years. But Paul Leckie donated a big piece of ground down there, which is now a county park, you know. And they have moved their poinsettia operations back to Mexico. I learned that, I think, just this past year. Paul, his main business was roots. He'd dig roots out of the ground, put them in a great big box, a big crate that held a piano, and he'd ship them all over the world. I'm not kidding. He went all over the world taking orders for poinsettias. And but his main business was these roots. The cut flowers and the potted plants, they were just sidelines. So anyway, I don't know where you know where poinsettia got its name?
No.
From Dr. Poinsett,
Oh, that's right. Okay.
who
Hear that
who
somewhere.
found the poinsettia down in Mexico and
Brought it up here.
christened it after himself.
There you go.
Yeah. Anyway, Paul Leckie was a great guy. I remember one time when he was fooling around in a trash pile and a rattlesnake bit him.
Oh dear.
And instead of sitting there, I think it was on one of his fingers or somewhere, but he ran all the way back to his ranch house, about a half a mile. Had he sat still, he would have been all right, but it pretty near killed him.
Oh no.
All that extra circulation
Sure.
from running. It was stupid, but he got scared.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was a great guy.
Well, unless anybody else has a question.
No, this is a lot to absorb.
Okay. Sir? No?
Mr. Chandler, I just had a few questions. Nothing that needs to be videotaped. Actually, just about yourself.
Oh,
Go ahead.
You got a few minutes. What was one of your most fond memories working here on base?
my retirement party.
And why is that?
Well, I used to be proud of my accomplishments, and still am. But my attitude has changed in the last few years. And a stronger attitude is I am thankful for all the opportunities I've had. I think that's more important. A lot of people think that people can make their own opportunities, but that's not true. Opportunities are generated by circumstances, and circumstances are made up there. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and the circumstances have been manipulated a great deal since then. But the opportunities come from those circumstances. And anyway, I am very grateful for all the opportunities I've had. And I don't recall, let's see, I think one of the pleasantest things when they Southern California Edison Company had a little party up at San Onofre on the site of the power plant at the beginning of the construction, just before they started. They had an opening ceremony, and they passed out little prizes or little thing, a little paperweight with a lot of information inside, which I still have. And I think I probably enjoyed that as much as anything.
No, you were, like you were saying, a jack of all trades, and you dealt with a lot of people. What do you think those people would say about you? How would they describe you?
Well, I'll tell you how the Marine Corps described me. The Marines described me when I first came here. That damn civilian. But I don't know. My last 5 or 6 years, I was treated with a great deal of respect. I think there were 2 civilians on the general staff. Of course, there are 2 kinds of staffs, the special staff and the general staff. Special staff is 1, 2, 3, and 4. The general staff is, there was all kinds of officers, mostly colonels, but 1 or 2 civilians. And I think in the last 5 years or so, when I was the director of the Natural Resources Office, I was treated with a great deal of respect. I had colonels calling me sir. So.
And that's just because of your contributions and your.
Well, I was the highest paid civilian on the base at the time.
All right.
But as I say, it's a little hard to answer some questions without bragging, or at least without sounding like you're bragging. And
Well, in closing, what would you tell Marines that are here on the base now, if you could give them some parting words?
Semper Fi. And I believe that. And I am proud of the Marines. They should be proud of being the oldest military organization in the United States. In fact, there was no United States when they were formed.
That's right.
And from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. I've known lots of generals, but my idol was Herman Pogemeyer Jr., wonderful man. Carl Hoffman was the general when I retired. And he was a great guy, a trumpet player. Well, he had a story about his trumpet. Overseas, he was always playing the trumpet, and it improved the morale of the troops. You know, he'd play popular stuff. And one day he lost his trumpet, couldn't find it anywhere. And they searched and searched, and they finally found it. That he would have been lost without it. That trumpet was his life. But he had a band here, and his wife had a chorus. They used to practice in the 17 Area Officers Club. And I was there. My wife and I attended a concert there that they put on. They were real musicians. And I admire that.
Well, thank you so very much. Unless you have some other words.
Well, Thank you. I don't know why people are always picking on me, but
Well,
I'm just a guy trying to get along, trying
Well,
to keep up with the big guys.
we appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, turn it off and I'll tell you something.